gathered friends, listen again to our legend of the Bionicle. Hello everyone, it's the 3rd of August. You know what that means? That means that Bionicle Day is right around the corner. So for those of you who don't know, my name is James Byrne, and Bionicle has been an inspiration of mine since 2004. It's inspired me to write, create, and much more. And my knowledge of Bionicle still has a few gaps in it, which is being filled out by content like this. It seems there's always something more on the horizon. It's incredible. I'm still discovering new things, even to this day, and I'm sure many of you are as well. So, we all know there's been a lot of awesome stuff that made it into Bionicle on its 10 years run. But as I've recently discovered, there's a lot of awesome stuff that didn't make it into Bionicle for a variety of reasons. And there is quite a lot indeed. It's like its own separate universe. It's like another version of the Kingdom, the Shadow Emperor. A Bionicle fan with an interesting talent for writing, I must say, has compiled this web document. And I, for this Bionicle Day, am going to read it. So this document is Early and Unused Story Concepts in Bionicle version 2 by the Shadow Emperor, aka Maku. The Bionicle story underwent many shifts in direction over its 10-year run. Character traits, plot details, world building, names, and more were changed, removed outright, or quietly retconned as the theme progressed. But we did receive the answers to many long-running mysteries as the story unfolded, chiefly the existence of and the purpose of the Big Secret, aka the Great Spirit Robot. It has become increasingly apparent over time that many of those answers had changed from how they were initially envisioned by the creators. So in the interest of documentation for myself and other Bionicle enthusiasts, I have decided to catalogue as much information as I can about the story concepts from 2001 to 2003 that disappeared in later years as the story evolved from the original premise. Most of the info is public knowledge, but some of it is sourced directly from conversations I've had with Bionicle co-creator and novelist Alastair Swinnerton, to whom I owe huge thanks for the existence of this document. In all cases, I directly quote and or link to my sources wherever possible. Okay, so we'll get right into it. The concept of Bionicle. The backstory of the Martinui robot was detailed by Alastair Swinnerton in the first iterations of the Bionicle Story Bible. It bears some similarities to the shattering backstory we got in 2009, but a number of elements were removed or retrofitted amidst the many story changes that took place after Alastair's departure from the theme, including Maku's very different original backstory, which will be detailed in a later section. The original concept for the Bionicle universe began with the destruction of a planet. The great beings set in motion a plan to colonize a new world, and to this end they created a large biomechanical evacuation ship called Martinui to transport their civilization, which was held in stasis, to a safe haven elsewhere in the universe. Throughout the journey, the ship was crewed by the Tohunga, who worked with Rahi to maintain the ship and its systems. The first asterisk is, this has not been explicitly confirmed, but a 2001 poster states that the villages and Rahi once worked together in harmony. More on that in the Rahi section. Oh, interesting. The Toa served as security officers to watch over the ship's system and cargo. Another component of Martinui's system was the Borak, whose job was to clean the debris from the robot's exterior once it arrived. Oh, we got some asterisks here. And this information was confirmed by Christian Faber in a blog post. Upon reaching the destination world, Martinui, the guiding soul and consciousness of the ship, was meant to lay down the infrastructure for the civilization to thrive once again. Okay, that is quite interesting. Honestly, that would make a very interesting story concept. You know what this reminds me of? Silver Sun, the ABC show from way back in the day. That's a source of nostalgia for many children of my generation across Australia. I can see it now. Martinui leaves on its 90-year journey toward the New World. On board, a Tohunga crew and a biomechanical civilization frozen in stasis animation. It's a thought. However, something went wrong during the voyage. An entity known as the Makuta sabotaged the mission, infecting the ship with a virus which caused Martinui to crash land on the planet, with only its head, knees and feet emerging from the ocean. The crew, sans the Toa, who were trapped in their canisters, disembarked onto the island paradise of Martinui. Their memories scrambled. Claiming the island as his own, Makuta was free to spread his dark infection from the robot's interior onto the land, weakening the islanders' abilities and enslaving the Rahi beasts that now roam wild. As a result of the crash, Martinui, Makuta and everyone else on the island had forgotten their true purpose, and the Tohunga lived on in the belief that they were always meant to be brought to the island they called paradise. Deep inside the robot, the beings the crew was tasked with saving remained in stasis, forgotten by all. A few more things of note. The Red Star was present in the story Bible, functioning as some kind of orbiting mothership per Gordon Climbs of Templar Games. Templar Games! That's the people behind the Martinui Online game. A post from Greg Farstey claims the Red Star's function in aiding Martinui's takeoff was also planned. One line from an early story Bible described the Bionicle planet as a place that might be Earth, according to Greg. Although Alistair has since clarified to me that the Bionicle universe was never intended to feature humans, and the race of the ship's cargo was not specified. That reminds me of a video that Essinger did on TikTok, which I saw. Apparently he found out that the Bionicle movie, The Mask of Light, was originally going to have a human character of some kind that was transported into the Bionicle universe. Of course, he and many others who watched that were grateful that didn't come to pass, but wow. I mean, I have no words. It is also unclear how the 6 environments of Martinui were formed in this version. Some possible clues we have are that Makuta is seen manipulating the island in the 2001 comics, and according to the Mask of Light director's commentary, the island was intentionally designed to look alien and synthetic, as seen in the film, thanks to Mr. N for the screenshots, but we really can't say for sure. You know what's funny about the Mask of Light director? Because of his name, Bionicle the Mask of Light has every right to be called a Shakespeare work. You can't make this up. So now we got the Toa. A story booklet included with the Quest for the Masks card game sheds some light on the earliest incarnations of the Toa and the world they inhabit. My friend Peri, who first uploaded the booklet, had a hunch that the contents were taken from one of the earliest story Bibles. I showed these scans to Alistair, who confirmed that it was, at the very least, closely based on the material he wrote, if not lifted wholesale. There is a possibility that this is sourced from the very first development Bible commissioned by LEGO in early 2000. Why that version was used for the game instead of an updated one is unknown. The most noteworthy detail from the book is how the Toa are viewed in a strongly religious light. The 6 regions of the island are identified with a Toa, with each individual koro being dedicated to and named after one of the 6 heroes and their corresponding element that make up the island. Also referenced in the Quest for the Masks card game, this is in contrast to later story which suggested the Toa Mata were named after the elements rather than the other way around. Each Toa has a shrine and a temple, and as such were both worshipped for the protection they provided against Makuta and feared for the devastation they would inflict on the island if left unappeased. Oh. That paints the Toa in a more destructive savior appearance. Tahu and Gali are rivals, with the former directing lava toward the sea, much to her displeasure. Kopaka, meanwhile, provides protection from Tahu's heat. Tahu's hatred for Garli's domain is explicitly referenced in this comic. Garli and Liwa are said to create storms when they do battle against one another. The legends are mentioned in this comic, which also includes a hint that the Tahu once knew each other at one point. Garli is also the most widely worshipped for the life-bringing power of an oceanic domain. Pohatu is believed to be the most dependable and watchful of the Toa, but he, along with Anua, create rock slides and earthquakes respectively if the islanders fail to properly care for their domains. Matoran of Onukoro, take care of your domains, or you will face our judgment! These godlike qualities extend to the Toa's characterization as well. Tower of Mirrors on BZ Power recalls a statement from Greg Varste on the matter in the now deleted Planned vs. Not Planned thread. The Toa were originally supposed to be more solemn and stoic and serious, like gods, but the story team decided to make them more humanized, talkative, and more down to earth with individual personalities. Yeah, that can be seen in The Mask of Light, for example. Like the Toa are beings above the Matoran who the story focuses on, whereas in the other three movies, they're the main focus, and are indeed more humanized and talkative. I like that change. After this document was originally published, he clarified some details on the TTV message boards on how the story team decided how to portray the Toa. The only major time I was able to influence something was at the very beginning, because the original notion was that all the Toa would essentially talk like Thor and be very godlike. And I suggested it should be more like the JLA or the FF, the Justice League of America or the Fantastic Four, I get it now, where everyone had distinct personalities, and they didn't always get along, and I did win that one. The Toa would be talking like Thor. Now I'm imagining Chris Hemsworth voicing Toa Tahu or something like that. It was when the first comic script went out for review. I had written it in my style, and Bob came back and told me how he thought the Toa should sound. To his credit, he was willing to listen to my reasoning and agreed to give it a try. Elements of the old characterization are still present in the Motunui Online game, referred henceforth as MNOG, MNOG, and the Legend of Motunui PC game. The former depicts the Toa as mysterious stoic warriors from the islanders' perspective, especially in the early chapters where the Toa are largely silent save for the jovial Pohatu, while the latter gives the Toa an otherworldly elemental undertone beneath their robotic voices. Okay, I'm not entirely sure what to make of that. Now imagine if that was the voice of the movie.
How did you find us?
During our talks, Alistair suggested that LEGO was uneasy about religious elements in Bionicle, hence its disappearance from the line in the later years. Greg also mentioned that LEGO received negative feedback from parents of perceived religious messages in Bionicle, which seems to have played a role in the decision to cull it from the franchise. Dang it, parents. One often overlooked retcon from Bionicle's early years is the original purpose of the Toa Stones. The quest for the Toa Game Boy Advance game establishes that the stones were used to tell the legend of Motunui, and that they were stolen from the villagers rather than being hidden long ago by the Toa Metru. The Legend of Motunui glossary confirms that the stones were used to tell the legend at Kainui specifically, and the game's ending cutscene shows Takua restoring them to their rightful place around the Kininui Ajama circle. This dovetails nicely with the start of the Legend of Motunui PC game, which is named as such because the legend is now coming to pass. Makuta has stolen the sacred Toa stones that used to tell legends. If the Toa stones are not recovered, the legend of Matanui cannot be told, said Wonua upon his rescue in quest for the Toa. There was a similar retcon concerning how the Toa canisters arrived on Matanui. The legend of Matanui, the legend itself, not the game, states that the Toa will fall from the skies to defeat Makuta and his beasts. While it's suggested in the legend that the Toa fall from the sky and immediately go on to confront Makuta, this was revealed not to be the case in the latest stories told by Greg Varstey. Instead, the Great Cataclysm caused the canisters to be launched from Matanui's chest into the ocean, where they would remain for 1,000 years until being summoned by Takua. The 2006 novel Island of Doom even features a scene where Turaga Doom explains to the Toa that technically they did in fact fall from the heavens, but only after being launched from the surface. But was that always the intention? We've already been over how the legend appears to contradict the official 2006 account, but there is actually more solid evidence to support the Toa canisters did indeed fall from the heavens when Takua summoned them, not a millennium prior. Take this 2001 comic, which also makes reference to a detail from the booklet about Liwa is clumsy on solid ground, or this conversation with Kapura in Matanui Online game. Vakama has told us to wait for more creatures to fall from the sky who will save us. I think one of them landed near the beach. I saw it fall when I was practicing before. Additionally, the quest for the Toa ending cutscene showed the Armajar beacon shooting straight up to the heavens, where the Toa canisters must be to receive the signal, but I've saved the best evidence for last. The Legend of Matanui's opening cutscene. Here we see the canisters falling from the sky, and they're engulfed in flames from atmospheric re-entry. I believe there are two possibilities for what is happening here. The Toa canisters clearly were meant to originate from space, but were they orbiting the planet on their own? It is possible they were ejected prior to the crash, maybe by Makuta in order to prevent them from interfering with his plans. Another possibility is that they were launched from the Red Star mothership. Regardless, something clearly went wrong before or during that trip, given they're all in literal pieces and have amnesia when they emerge onto the island. Another discarded concept, also present in the earliest bios on Bionicle.com, thanks to Peri for the 2001 website reconstruction. Yes, thanks Peri, thank you very much indeed. Was the idea of the Toa having different ages. Based again on the story booklet, Tahu was intended to be the oldest member, while Liwa was the youngest. This idea was never referenced in any official story, but Liwa certainly remained the youngest of the team in spirit. I should note that there is a fandom misconception that Onua was the oldest. As best as I can tell, this is from an old Q&A with Greg, but he is unsure on the answer and could very well be misremembering. Yeah, and even in earlier material I thought it was Tahu who was the oldest, until they were all the same age. Along with the booklet, Tahu was created when the planet was forming. An early bio for Onua on Bionicle.com stated, Onua is an earth spirit and was created by the great beings when the continents of the planet were forming from the fiery molten lava. Actually, hold up a second. If I could add something... When I was exploring the Biomedia project, which is like a big web archive of all Bionicle material, which I frankly cannot recommend enough, it's incredible. There's also a live performance. I think it was from Legoland when Bionicle was being launched, and they said stuff like this.
Tahu is the oldest of the Toa, the fire spirit created by the great beings when the planet was first forming. He is the fiercest of the 6 Toa and the most feared. Tahu, the Toa of fire.
Perhaps there's a connection. With Gali also referenced as a younger Toa in the booklet, Peri shared with me a theory that the Matoran had an untold origin story about how the Toa, and by extension their regions on the island, were created in a certain order. Tahu, the oldest, was created first from the fires of the planet. There it is! Then Onua and Pohatu as the land formed, Kopaka and Gali as the oceans formed and water froze on the island's peaks, and finally Liwa once plant life began growing. The order between Onua/Pohatu and Kopaka/Gali is left ambiguous here, oddly fitting given how Pohatu and Kopaga's elements were made variations on earth and water after Alistair was told LEGO had 6 product lines. It stands to reason that the original order would have been a simple fire, earth, water, air. Assuming it did indeed exist, why we never got to hear this legend in full is anyone's guess, but it could be due to the fact that the great beings had a major role in the story. The controversy over them is detailed in their section below, as well as the decision to have all the Toa be the same age. Perhaps these story decisions were linked? It is also difficult to reconcile the backstory of the Toa being security officers with the mythological one where they were different ages, because they were created with the island. If the Matorans' beliefs about the ages were incorrect, then it would most likely confuse the audience. Regardless of the reasoning, all references to Toa ages, and many of them being corrected by the Great Beings, have been removed from the Bionicle.com bios by early 2002. Although in 2003, the Extras gallery in Bionicle game would still mention that the Toa were created by the Great Beings. According to Greg, one early story Bible established that the Toa were meant to perform a ritual dance upon discovering a mask. He opted not to include it in the 2001 comics as he didn't feel it made sense and would have looked silly. These dances were also left out of the Legend of Martinui game in favor of a more traditional item get animation. The Legend of Martinui glossary has more interesting tidbits. The Kaini Nui entry reads, "The Great Temple, where Toa learned to be Toa Kaita, and the Turaga learned to be Turaga Nui." Turaga Nui! That's something. In a cutscene from the game, we see the Toa unlock special transformation chambers with 2 halves of the Makoki stone in order to become Kaita, something which wouldn't be mentioned again or featured until the Tale of the Toa novel. It may have once been the intention that the Toa could only form Kaita in special chambers like these in the Martinui robot, or at least needed to do so before they could do it by themselves later on. There is a considerable amount of evidence that the Toa Kaita names were originally swapped. Credit to Peri for pointing this out to me. Perhaps most famously, the 2001 Power Pack includes a chrome silver Hau piece which was billed as the Kanohi Rua. In current canon, Akamai wears a gold Hau called the Aki, and canon Wairuha wears a silver Miru called the Rua. So this Rua doesn't really fit either of them. Taking a look at the original BionicleMusic.com website suggests that rather than being a mistake, it was at one point the intention for the Tahu Pohatu Onua fusion to be named Wairuha and wear a silver Hau called the Rua. The Liwa Gali Kopaka fusion could likewise be expected to be called Akamai, wearing a mask called the Aki, although it is unclear whether that Kaita would have been a gold mask or a silver mask. There is more proof that the names were swapped, and it's all in the names themselves. The final version of the story, Akamai is the spirit of valor, and Wairuha is the spirit of wisdom. However, the meanings of the names are inverted. Akamai is Hawaiian for wise or clever, and Wairuha is derived from the Maori word Wairua. That can be roughly translated to mean a similar concept to the Western Soul. Martinui Online game complicates things further, but does support a hypothesis. In dialogue with Matoro, who is translating on behalf of Nuju, it is stated, "The Toa will unite and find more power in their joining. They shall merge their skills, their knowledge, their wills to become the wisdom and the spirit, named in prophecy Akamai and Wairuha. In these forms, they are the Toa Kaita." Assuming they were listed respectively, wisdom corresponded to Akamai, or canon Wairuha, and spirit, likely the original name for valor, corresponded to Wairuha, or canon Akamai. There is more evidence still. One early cutscene still present in the game's files has the Kaita names swapped and both wearing golden masks. Details here, courtesy of Peri and Mr. N. An error with mask colours could be emblematic of the many changes the Kaita went through, especially now as we've established that canon Akamai would have once worn a silver Hau. Perhaps canon Wairuha would have had a gold mask in contrast to canon Akamai's silver? One last thing to point out. a script for the Kaita's final cutscene appearance, in addition to having their names swapped as per the norm, refers to Akamai, or Canon Waiwuha. I know, it's hard to keep up. Yep, you're telling me, bud. With a feminine pronoun, it is unknown whether this was intentional. Also worth discussing here is the original nature of the Makoki stone. In a post on Faber Files, Bionicle co-creator Christian Faber details an unused story direction about how the Toa were going to use the stone to reawaken Matanui, or at least attempt to, as discussed in the Bulrock section below. The description of the Makoki stone is interesting. The keys are made out of a special material, and once they are combined, it could maybe work as a living chip. Maybe the core of the new consciousness that the Toas have to install in the robot under Matanui. It could contain all the knowledge that the 6 Toa have collected in their quests on Matanui. My friend Mr. N has a blog that discusses the early Bionicle story in great detail. One of the articles he's written is about the Makoki stone and how it may have been of much greater significance. As he discusses in the article, many early sources, including this one again, talked about how the Toa were accumulating wisdom and knowledge from the masks in addition to power. This wisdom would then be infused into the Makoki stone, which acts as a sort of hard drive for the Toa. He goes on to suggest that the Toa might have had amnesia because they lost access to their masks and stone, their connection to the Matanui robot, when they arrived on the island. By finding them again, they regain their understanding of what to do, enter the robot, combine their powers, and purge the evil infecting their home. The rest of the article goes into how the Makoki stone was used to form the Toa Kaita. 3 Toa combine their stones, and 3 consciousnesses are combined to create a Kaita. I highly recommend checking out the full article, even if only through Google Translate. It ties everything together brilliantly. As for how the stone would have woken up the Bulrock. Lastly, Greg is also well known for his dislike of the Tree-Speak dialect. Bob Thompson, the story team head from 1999 to 2005, was the one who mandated that Lewa use the language, according to Greg. Turaga. Alistair had no involvement in the development of the Metronui backstory. As such, the plot point of the Turaga being the former Toa cells were, most likely, a later addition by Bob Thompson. As Peri notes, there were some early implications that the Toamata once worked alongside the Islanders. Another example is here, which is consistent with the backstory of the Toa as security officers of the ship. Presumably the Turaga would have been the leaders of the Matoran while they crewed the evacuation robot, but this is unconfirmed. Turaga Matau's elemental powers were at one point going to include flight, according to the booklet. The relationships between the Turaga are also more fleshed out, with Vakama and Matau and Nokama and Nuju being close friends, while Onua and Wanua are close trading partners. While Nakama and Nuju are both acknowledged as being very quiet, there is no mention that Nuju requires a translator to speak. Some 2001 media, including Quest for the Toa and Comic 1, The Coming of the Toa, do feature a more talkative Nuju. Vakama is also noticeably less hot-tempered in The Mask of Light and other later media than his book descriptions would appear to imply. Notably, he's quite the grouch to Takua in Quest for the Toa, and at the start of Matanui Online game. Well, was he really much of a grouch? All he did was just look at him and just walk away. I guess that could count as a cold shoulder. But anyway. One aspect of the early Bionicle story that remains unclear is how the Turaga retained some knowledge of the Toa and Matanui's past, while everyone else in the villages remembered next to nothing. Alistair did not remember the reason for this, but the Mr. N presented an intriguing theory that I thought was worth mentioning here. As he explains, the Kaini entry in the Legend of Matanui glossary reads as follows: Great temples where the Turaga go to think the great thoughts. They are centers of wisdom and learning, and usually have an armor jaw. The great thoughts. That will be referenced by Pohatu in the movie.
You travel with Gali?
No, she has gone to ponder the great thoughts.
Furthermore, the Kaini Nui description, posted in the Toa section above, states that the Turaga could learn how to form Turaga Nui at the temple. These details, as Mr. N theorizes, may suggest that some or all of the Turaga's knowledge of the past came from studying at these centers of knowledge. But the Turaga Nui, what use would a Turaga Nui have? Like, would it fight something? Or would it access ancient knowledge that even the Turaga themselves didn't know? My friend Peri has an additional theory relating to the Turaga Nui. In advanced produced media, the Turaga are often depicted standing on top of the Toa head statue at Kaini Nui. Also see this image and notice the hole near where the Turaga are standing. The same hole is featured on the concept art by Christian Faber and can be seen in the Bionicle Nestle promotional CD. The opening animation shows it on top of the Kaini Nui head as the hole opens. Peri believes that this is where the Turaga can enter to become a Turaga Nui, as it seems unlikely they would be able to make a Nui, 6 beings, with the same underground chambers that the Toa used to become Kaita, which is 3 beings. Turaga were sometimes called or compared to priests in early media, as this example shows.
The Turaga have the wisdom of priests and the courage of great leaders.
They were never referred to as such after 2001, which is likely related to LEGO's decision to limit the religious elements of Bionicle, as detailed in the Toa section. Matoran. The number of villagers presented in each Koro varied a lot during the early years. It was Bob Thompson's intent for there to be 12 per village initially, but when the Mask of Light showed hundreds of Matoran in the Kohli Stadium, this was adjusted to 1,000 in total, according to Greg. Takua's origin story has always been a bit of a mystery. Was he created by Templar, Sapphire, the Web team, or the Story team? And I asked about it. Alistair confirmed that he created the character and the concept of the 7th Toa concurrently, which makes sense as he was the story consultant for the Quest of the Toa GBA game. It is unknown when precisely the name Takua was created, as Templar internally referred to him as the Visitor or George early on, and a cheat present in the Quest for the Toa also references the George name. George, the Chronicler. Imagine that. George! George! So, George, this view close enough? There is no information on Harley and Nuparu prior to their appearance in 2002, which probably means that they did not exist in the story before that year. And indeed, they didn't exist in the Motunui Online game. An early Mask of Light solicit mentions 3 islanders going on the quest for the mask, whereas in the final release we see just Jala and Takua. Given her prominence in the movie and the fact that she appears to have been expressly created for it, Harley may have once been intended to play an even larger role in 2003. My personal theory for Harley's creation was they wanted to avoid having major movie characters share a mask, as Koto would have with Nokama. Maku, meanwhile, wouldn't have made sense because they wanted to add romantic tension between Jala and the female lead, and it simply wouldn't do to have Maku dump Huki for someone else now, would it? Indeed, Shadow Emperor. And I would also like to add, there is a possibility that Harley may have been created for the Motunui Online game 2, the Final Chronicle, although that could have led up to the movie as well. As for Nuparu, my thinking is LEGO created him as a Lacton engineer character to serve as the Boxer's inventor, or they simply wanted a new face to be packaged with the set. In 2001, LEGO bandied about the idea of a 7th tribe on the island, which would have worshipped Makuta and worked to carry out his will on the island according to Gordon. This idea apparently never went very far beyond the Kolibol trader. Indeed. Later named Akmu in the Motunui Online game, and Alistair was unfamiliar with the concept. We do, however, have an image from the game showing an enslaved Garma Torin working in a Kolibol sweatshop. Wow, the cutting room floor! Why haven't I never seen this before? Mr. N wrote an in-depth article on the subject that I'd like to share here. He discusses how the online game hints that a mysterious third party was behind the infection of the Kolibols in the game. He also mentions that the way Makuta infects masks in 2001 was never made clear, and it could have been the intent that this mysterious 7th tribe was responsible for spreading his dark will around the island. This is all highly speculative, but given Makuta's lack of a physical form in 2001, it makes sense that he would have to act through agents on the surface in order to carry out his takeover. Perhaps said agents have been present on the island since the very beginning, gradually spreading Makuta's infection to the Rahi and their masks. Maybe they were also responsible for poisoning the Vuatamaka trees and stealing the Toa stones, but that's just further supposition on my part. Considering the meaning of Makuta's name, it comes from the Maori Makutu, which means witchcraft, while the Krata, introduced in 2003, explained the logistics behind how the infected masks propagated across the island. The mystery of the seventh tribe and how far their influence truly reached remains one of the most tantalizing, unexplained Bionicle oddities. Wow. Imagine if they did go ahead with the seventh tribe. But there's already a dark-colored Matoran tribe, the Onu Matoran. Maku and Huki's romantic relationship was not featured in any story Bible. The decision to include it was made by Templar and the web producer independent of the story team. A direct quote from the 2001 Story Bible was included by Templar in a recent blog post. It has become a secret wish that Kapura's single-minded nature will enable him to learn the secret art of covering large distances quickly by walking slowly. Kapura has a habit of coughing and farting flame balls, which often tries Valakama's patience and is a constant irritation to the studious Ahi. Okay, well that is indeed fire coming out of both ends of Kapura. That clears up a little mystery for me. But what I don't understand is, why do the other Tamatoran have that ability? Why is it only just Kapura? Why does Kapura have it to begin with? This confirms that Kapura's power originates from the Story Bible and not Templar or Sapphire. The other interesting thing to note here is the name Ahi, the Maori word for fire, which is likely an early name for Jala, itself being Rotuman, meaning to burn. In an interview with L.J. Johnson, Alistair mentioned that the dictionary he based Bionicle's names off was Maori, yet despite this, it is known that numerous other Polynesian languages were drawn from for the theme, including Hawaiian, Fijian, and Gamilaroi, which for context is an Aboriginal Australian people whose lands extend from New South Wales to southern Queensland, one of the 4 largest indigenous nations here in Australia. So I am skirting around the very well-known Maori name controversy because it's mentioned later, I think. But here in Australia, copying Australian indigenous names and mythologies and stuff like that is a huge no-no. Yes, I know the intentions were good and they didn't mean any offense, but it is what it is. We're not going to get into that, but hey, their culture, their rules, basically. Given the presence of this early Maori name in the Story Bible, it may be the initial names Alistair used were taken from Maori before the choice was made to reference other Polynesian languages. The thing with naming stuff after Polynesian languages and culture is that, it is still very much a thing today. Like, you can name stuff after the ancient Greeks and Romans and ancient Egyptians all day long because that's long in the past. But Polynesian society is still very much a thing. Mr. N brought to my attention a Russian Bionicle magazine page, which mentions that the Matorans celebrate when the Toa find masks. Translated to English, the relevant part of the passage says, "The Turaga know that Tohunga will celebrate in honor of each new mask that the Toa will find." This is most likely a reference to the great Takara dances we see in the Legend of Motunui, which were originally called Haka prior to the Maori controversy. Obviously. Note that the Legend of Motunui's depiction of dances is slightly inaccurate. The Turaga's right and left-hand Matoran are specifically meant to be by their sides during the dance. I think that might have been a slight edit to make sure it's not a complete copy. I would be remiss if I failed to talk about the myth, the legend himself, Lee the Surfer. Oh yes, a full dissection of the character and his role can be found in one of Mr. N's articles. I will cover the basics here. One of the scant few references to the character is by Jala in the German version of Motunui Online game. Ich bin Jala, Kommandant der Wache und vom Stamm der Lee Surfer. Or, I am Jala, Captain of the Guard, and from the tribe of Lee the Surfer. He was also given a brief mention in the Bionicle.com lexicon and Jala's 2002 biography, although little new information came of it. The concept of Matoran sub-tribes in the villages is an interesting one, although it saw no mention in any other sources. What Lee looked like isn't known. However, the image of an all-yellow Picari-wearing surfer is now famous in the Bionicle fandom, despite the fact that no source for it has yet surfaced. Allegedly, he was pictured in a UK magazine or comic previewing the Quest for the Toa game, with a screenshot of the game's character creator showing an all-yellow character, which the caption described as resembling legendary Lee. Also, according to Greg, the reason Lee Khan was given a different name in 2004 was due to legal issues. Revisiting the story booklet, there are a few differences in the depiction of the Matoran that are worth mentioning. The Lee Coronans are said to constantly chatter, which allows them to find things in dense swamplands. Echolocation? And show affection by imitation, while Lee Coronans are definitely the most boisterous of the Matoran types. Neither of these traits made it into any canon media. The Coronans, man, that's a tongue twister. The Coronans, meanwhile, are said to keep Gawahi's waters pure and prevent the Kowahi frost from damaging Lewahi's wildlife. The latter was never touched upon in any media. The last thing I will touch on is the change from Tahunga to Matoran. While the former word no longer exists in any form in official Bionicle canon, at one point there was a canon explanation on the Bionicle website. The villagers of Martinui have realized that they are in fact all one people, and so have taken to the new name Matoran. They are ready to stand together and defend their island from the Borak swarm. The last mention of Tohunga in any Bionicle media was in the 2003 lexicon, which also stated it was the formal word for Makuta. Indeed, and if you look into it, Tohunga actually means something like priest or something like that in Maori language. And that was a big sticking point in the controversy. And now we're on to Rahi. A 2001 poster hints at the original role of Rahi in the Martinui robot. In the time before time, the island of Martinui was a paradise to behold. Many great beasts known as Rahi worked in harmony with the Tohunga villagers. Then the Makuta came and cast a dark shadow across the land. The Makuta brought a great hunger to the Rahi, a hunger for the sacred Kanohi masks, and the Tohunga made stone carvings to warn of these awesome beasts. In these dark times, Rahi challenged Toa without respect, and Rahi will challenge even their own kind. Such is their hunger. Since the original posting of this document, the text on this poster has emerged in other places, including a small booklet attached to a licensed Bionicle backpack and the Russian Lego magazine. This lends credence to the idea that the story comes on a story Bible, thanks to Mr. N for both finds. This description differs significantly from the Metro Nui storyline, where the Rahi act much the same way they did on Martinui, being either indifferent or outright antagonistic to the Matoran. It also sheds a new light on the practice of Rahi taming, which is really about restoring Rahi to their natural non-aggressive state. A Quest for the Masks story card supports this. Additionally, the infected Rahi have a hunger for masks is also referenced in Quest for the Masks, but doesn't appear anywhere else. It certainly gives a story justification for why the Rahi sets were advertised as fighting against one another during play, with the exception of the Manas, which were said to challenge each other in order to remain combat ready in their bio in Comic 3, Triumph of the Toa. The intent for Martinui's wildlife varies over the course of the series. Initially, they and the flora were to have a much more organic-looking biomechanical design, as can be seen here in these Tristan Fabia concepts and this Legend of Martinui trailer. A later revision of that cutscene appears in the beta build, showing a shift to purely robotic wildlife. Later in the Mask of Light commentary, the creators, Dave Molina and Terry Shakespeare, state that the island's fauna has become biomechanical over time. Thanks to Peri for this transcription. Bob Thompson, the creative producer, was explaining to us the story of Martinui, the island, and its inhabitants as far as like wildlife. It's going through a transition right now, from things that were natural and starting to turn into biomechanical. So we had to approach all the wildlife, the birds, the ash bear, and the fish, and I believe also one of the Gaku birds. So you see them so they're almost half and half. Actually, really, in a way, the ash bear was handled almost all the way mechanical. but the other characters are almost halfway transitions between natural and mechanical. It's unclear what they were building toward with this, because as with some other Mask of Light concepts, the idea of Rahi evolution rarely came up again in the series. One possibility could be that the natural animals are native to the planet where Martinui crash landed, whatever it was meant to be at this point in development. Since the interior of the Martinui robot was intended to have a greater focus on a biomechanical/organic theme, which is supported by Faber concept art and Mask of Light storyboards for Metro Nui, the island's flora and fauna may have been meant to evoke that origin. At one point in Martinui Online game's development, the player was going to be able to build Rahi with the help of a biodermis smith, which is an early word for protodermis based on this preliminary dialogue from one of the Orokoro guildmasters. "They make goods and livestock from the protodermis. Without it, they cannot trade for stone. We will lose that market." The bolded point was removed from the final game. The idea of villagers building and using Rahi to help them certainly supports the idea that they work together aboard the evacuation ship. Why was the name Biodermis changed? We actually have an official answer on this. Greg stated in a Q&A thread that the name was legally rejected, and it only takes a Google search to reveal that Biodermis is the name of a scar treatment company, which has been around for over 30 years. What a twist. Lastly, here are a few facts related to specific Rahi. A quest for the Mask card states that the Manako are the leaders of the Manas, which is the only time this idea was ever referenced. Likewise, the Legend of Martinui glossary states that the Kuma Nui was a fusion between Moaka and Kainra. When Kainra and Moaka are combined, they form this giant rat-like creature. The rat is bigger than the tiger and the bull. No other piece of Bionicle media claims that these three Rahi are connected in any way, or indeed that natural Rahi fusions like this are possible. Although there is always a possibility that the bio is simply pointing out that the Kuma Nui resembles those two other Rahi, not that it is necessarily some kind of unorthodox Kaita fusion. One last oddity I'd like to bring up. In Quest of the Toa, Mato has been captured by a Kiwa bird that is apparently acting as the mother to a nest of Taku. The two races are said to be related in the 2002 bios. Baby Taku would appear again in Tale of the Toa when Liwa accidentally knocks one out of its nest. Peri also has a theory that the electric bugs featured in the Likoro chapter of the Martinui Online game may have been intended as Nui Rama larvae. That would make sense actually. Even if we discount that, the depiction of any creatures acting like parents and children in Bionicle is definitely worth a head scratch. Kanohi. Despite its inclusion in the Legend of Martinui, the Vahi was not mentioned anywhere in the story Bibles, according to Greg. Its appearance in the Borak Kal storyline was in response to fan interest in the masks on BZ Power. This is contradictory information on how the Toa were meant to acquire their golden Kanohi, referred to exclusively by Quest for the Masks as the Golden Master Masks of Power. Nowhere is this better exemplified than in the Martinui Online game, where Liwa gets his golden mask from his Suva in the Likoro chapter. This is also the method of acquisition seen in the Quest for the Masks. The Toa lacked their golden masks when at Kaini Nui in the Martinui Online game, whereupon they suddenly gained them upon climbing the temple stairs. This sequence was adapted from the Legend of Martinui. The PC game complicates this even further, with the Toa losing their golden masks after Makuta separates the Kaita, which also somehow leaves the Toa Kaita masks behind, seemingly suggesting a connection between them, and then inexplicably having them again in the final cutscene. The final explanation of the gold mask's acquisition would eventually be relayed in the Tale of the Toa, where the Toa place their collected masks on statues at Kaini Nui and receive the golden Kanohi. One final piece of the puzzle, Mr. N found by looking at PSD files for 2002 materials that the Toa originally did not have their golden masks in the renders, suggesting their rather haphazard inclusion was a late addition to the story. Wow, extreme kudos for these guys for digging in so deep and finding very specific files. One rather contentious topic in the fandom is whether the Toa utilized the noble masks during the quest in 2001. The removal of Legend of Martinui from canon left Martinui Online game and the online animations as the only source to show the Toa using them. Greg Farstein's current explanation is that the Toa opted not to use them as they were weaker than the Great Masks, but he offered a much longer rationale in 2003. All I can tell you is the story as I have always read and understood it. The Toa were told to go out and collect 6 great masks apiece. Once that was done, they would get their gold masks. That has been repeated multiple times in multiple places. Obviously, the folks doing the movies chose to interpret the story differently. I'm not saying they are wrong and you should ignore the movie. I am simply saying that is not how I understand the saga. I could certainly be wrong, and I know it has been established pre-Gold Mask that the Toa made use of the Noble Mask powers. But here's what I wonder. There are 6 noble masks per Koro, one of which is being worn by the Turaga, so if Tahu decides he needs to call on the Mask of Concealment, what happens? Vakama is wearing it. That is part of the reason I always try to avoid the Toa using noble masks issue in my stories. The other reason is that it would have made the initial story even more complicated if the emphasis was that the Toa had to collect 12 masks before they could progress. I did not have room in the comics to collect the great and noble masks. Per the Quest for the Masks booklet, originally masks were stored on a totem as opposed to the Suvas. The booklet also mentions that a Konohi is missing from Gali's shrine in Gakoro, and Nokama sent out villagers to recover the mask. A similar scenario is present in Legend of Martinui, where a Gakoronen tells Gali that a Konohi Rao was stolen from the village. However, the game only features a single Rao for Gali to connect. Seemingly no difference to any other mask the Toa need to complete their quest, so the significance of this particular mask being missing is unknown. The Konohi Avoki was originally called Koruska, according to BZ Power. The origin may be the Latin word coruscus, which means shining or twinkling. Note also the inspiration could have also come from a number of more Romance languages, which have a similar cognate. Lastly, a Quest for the Mask card also states that Makuta's infection on masks is irreversible, and speak of the devil, quite literally, the Makuta. Makuta is one of the most interesting concepts in Bionicle. The conniving, backstabbing genius Pterodax is only the latest incarnation of Bionicle's main antagonist. In fact, there are at least 3 distinct versions of the character present in the franchise.
I am the darkness in the heart of Martinui,
said the Makuta in the Triumph of the Toa. The first iteration of Makuta closely resembles the devil, from the Bible, and intentionally so, according to Alistair. The legends regard him as an omnipresent evil, a shape-shifting spirit of destruction who controls and manipulates the environment of Martinui, corrupts wildlife, and has terrorized the population for eons. Whether he is a character at all or merely a force of nature is ambiguous. The villagers are ignorant of his true nature, and his 2001 Bionicle.com bio is suitably enigmatic, repeatedly emphasizing that what we know of him, or it, is only a legend. This version of him appears in the Martinui Online game, which plays up as a creation versus destruction dichotomy between Martinui and Makuta, the latter of whom is referred to as the Nothing, or the Void. In creation there is destruction, and in destruction there is rebirth. There is no such thing as void. All things are in flux, said Nuju. According to Gordon Climes of Templar Games, the dialogue and depiction of Makuta in the Martinui Online game was their doing, albeit based on the 2001 Story Bible. Their interpretation of the character is worth a read, like the first 2 quotes are from Mr. Climes, or see Templar's blog entry for the full real-world context regarding the latter 3 quotes. The void above Makuta is indeed a swirling mass of Lego pieces, though it's not supposed to be representative of his true form. Makuta is chaos and nihilism. Makuta is order and creativity. For me, Makuta represents the destructive aspects of playing with Lego. You would build something and then destroy it in order to build something new. Makuta is a maelstrom of swirling pieces. He represents the pile on the floor that all Lego creations come from, and will eventually return to. Good and evil just wasn't good enough anymore. It didn't make any sense anymore. But this was okay, because from the beginning, that's not what it was about. The Makuta wasn't evil, and his brother, Martinui, wasn't good. We knew that while building was fun, it was just as much fun to destroy. They were two sides of the same coin, and neither were wrong. It was all part of the play, a part of the learning, part of having fun. Not good or evil, creation and destruction. Equal powers in the universe, natural and necessary. Both good, both bad, both neither. It's true we'd painted destruction a bit negatively, using words like infected mask or monsters, but we needed the conflict. So the Makuta, for all its darkness and danger, was not evil after all, and he says as much at the end. The final act was the confrontation, not between good and evil, which was meaningless, but between creation and destruction, where everything comes from nothing and goes back to it, eventually. This was a struggle between the Toa and the Rahi, and Matanui and Makuta, and a Lego fan and her kid brother. Building and smashing happily, in equal measure. Our world had gone a bit mad, but to us, this helped make some sense of it. We wanted to share what small comfort it brought. Wow, that's deep, man. That completely changes the tone and paints a new picture. Incredible. Makuta is represented by an infected Hau in the first year, Matanui's own symbol corrupted. This is because Alistair's intention was for Makuta to be the inner darkness within Matanui, a part of the Great Spirit fallen from grace. This casts one of Makuta's most iconic quotes in new light.
The people of the world are builders, but look into their hearts, and you will find they also have the power to destroy. I am that power. I am destruction, and I will destroy you.
There's actually an Messenger video where he dubs all of the characters in that cutscene, and no AI was used at all. Based. Since Makuta takes the form of a villager in this scene, it may appear that he is referring to them alone, and this is certainly how I and many others interpreted it as a child. But he is actually describing Matanui and everyone else, including the Toa. Their own inner darkness manifests as the Shadow Toa, which is how Makuta was once going to appear in 2001. This was, however, developed without Alistair's involvement, as he has stated he had no intention for there to be a final confrontation with him, and he also told me that he was not responsible for writing the 2001 website bio. Initially intended to appear in Legend of Matanui, it appears that the Shadow Toa were originally Makuta shape-shifting into 6 beings at once, rather than being mere illusions created to test the Toa, as they were in the tail of the Toa. Evidence for this can be found in the game data, where the final level dialogue reveals that Makuta appears to each of the 6 Toa individually and beckons them to complete a final challenge.
You have come very far, bold Anua, but your luck and that of your fellow Toa is about to run out. I am but one form of Makuta. Your friends face the others as we speak. Defeat my challenge, and you defeat me. Fail in your effort, and Matanui falls with you.
Bionicle fans would have to wait to get the Shadow Toa battle until 2003's Tale of the Toa, by which point Makuta's nature had changed, and he was now a physical character with a single form. Accordingly, they dissipate following the Toa's battle, but this was not always the case. The extended Hungarian translation of the novel mentions the Shadow's Toa remains retreating into tunnels after their defeat. If you read the English release and wondered why the Toa don't go on to confront the Makuta after the Shadow Toa, it's because he initially was the Shadow Toa. The most up-to-date recounting of the Shadow Toa battle, written by Greg, differs from Kathy Hopka's version, in that it depicts the Toa acknowledging the darkness within themselves and absorbing their dark counterparts into their bodies. Ironically, this later version actually fits better with the original intent for Makuta as Matanui's dark side. While Makuta was established as a shapeshifter early on, we wouldn't get him as a set until his 2003 Shadow Titan form. Makuta having no concrete form in 2001 was intentional, and indeed Alistair was actually against Makuta having a set form at all. Of course, this changed from 2003 and Mask of Light, where the Lord of Shadows appears as more of a character than a force of destruction, but elements in his original nature remain. Makuta is hinted at having deeper, perhaps altruistic motivations for his behavior. such as his reluctance to unleash the Rakshi on the island.
Must I release those who should never see the light of day?
His genuine offer to spare Jala's life in exchange for the mask.
Bring me the mask, Takua. Bring it to me, and you won't lose your friend.
And his own stated desire to protect Matanui by keeping him asleep.
Now, I will protect Matanui from you.
Protect him!
Sleep spares him pain. Awake, he suffers.
That was foreshadowing over a long period of time, wasn't it? Peri has a post about this that goes into greater detail in this topic. It's well worth a read, especially in light of the style guide info about Makuta having good reasons for his seemingly nasty behavior. Makuta is also regarded as a troubled soul in the director's commentary. Alistair was not able to elaborate on the meanings behind these lines because he did not write the final Mask of Light script. However, the ending of the film does appear to align somewhat with the original version. Makuta and Takunuva fall into the protodermis and fuse into a new, benevolent being, whose Makuta components are no longer rusted and pitted. The original idea was that Makuta is a part of Matanui, with light and darkness joined together again. Makuta is redeemed, and the Great Spirit can awaken. Or can he? In his blog, Christian Faber has another interpretation of Makuta's role in Mask of Light, which references the original idea of Makuta being an infection. Takanuva had to merge with Makuta to defeat him. Light and darkness are connected, and Makuta actually did good by securing that only the right heroes re-enter the giant robot to restart it, just like the body actually grows stronger and more immune after a virus. Additionally, Greg Farste mentioned in a 2003 Q&A that Makuta did not want worship from the Matoran, further distancing this version from the 2001 incarnation, who at one point was planned to have a tribe devoted to him, as detailed in the Matoran section above. Alistair says Makuta was not originally conceived as part of a species or brotherhood, which was referenced when Makuta beckoned Vakama to join him and his brothers in Legends of Metronui. That was probably a Bob Thompson edition, as Greg recalls. He was surprised to find out about it. Strangely, some Mask of Light concept art for the Rakshi labels their controllers as Krana rather than Krata. It's unknown that if this was a mistake by the artist, a remnant of an earlier concept of the Rakshi using mutated Krana, or perhaps just the artist using an older, legally approved name pending the creation of a new one. Mr. N has a post on this that goes into greater detail on the subject. Also see Greg's answer regarding the Toa Nuva image discussed in the post. The Great Beings. Very little is known about the early characters Papu and Rangi, who were involved with the creation of Matanui. The two seem to be based on Rangi Nui and Papa Tuanuku, the Sky Father and Earth Mother respectively of Polynesian mythology, hence their immediate removal after LEGO was contacted by Maori representatives. Oh yes. Alistair could not comment on them, so barring the improbable event that an unrevised 2001 story Bible is released. We will never know for sure what they were meant to be. I can say with near certainty that they are the original Great Beings. However, the possibility remains that there could have been more than just the two of them. The characters were briefly mentioned in the Matanui Online game and were promptly removed from the game's data once the controversy hit in 2001, and apparently from the story Bibles themselves. As Greg recalls, there was nothing on them in the original story Bibles. In Matanui Online game, they are established as mythological godlike beings to the islanders, much like Matanui and the Toa. At one point in the game's dialogue, Nakama tells the player character that the two have great plans for him, and a conversation with Jala, which is only present in the German translation, suggests that they were involved with the creation of Takoro, or at least the villagers believe as much. Takoro ist die Stadt im großen Flammenski, die von Papu und Rangi aus des Feuers ausgewählt wurde. Or Takoro is the city in the Great Fire Sea, which was selected by Papu and Rangi as the place of fire. As the villagers believed the island was meant to be created for them, it's no surprise that Papu and Rangi factored into the original story. It's no surprise that Papu and Rangi factored into the origin story they used to make sense of their new surroundings. The two other beings of note at one point, Matanui and possibly Makuta, fell under the moniker of Great Beings, according to Greg. Papu and Rangi may also have been conceived as the creators of the Toa, which would make sense as they created the biomechanical evacuation ship, and the Toa are one of its components. As mentioned and explained above in the Toa section, an early bio for Onua on Bionicle.com stated that Onua was created by the Great Beings when the continents were forming. However, it is important to keep in mind that the info we were given in 2001 was filtered through the Islanders' perspective. The Great Beings choosing Tako's location or creating Onua from magma was more than likely a part of the Motunui creation story as they understood it, not ironclad fact. As Alistair noted during our conversation, Bionicle's story was filled with red herrings and misdirection from the beginning in order to maintain the sense of mystery. One last thing I would like to touch on is highly speculative, but I do feel it's worth considering. We do not know for sure what the purpose of the Red Star was in the origin story, and I asked. Alistair did not remember and didn't write the material about the Red Star in the Bible, though he did find the concept familiar. As I mentioned in the Concept of Bionicle section above, Greg says that the Red Star was always intended to aid Motunui's takeoff. While this could be true, Templar's description of it as an orbiting mothership leaves me to wonder if there was more to it originally. Peculiarly, the Red Star basically disappeared from the story after the Motunui Online game, outside of a brief appearance in a Templar-made recap video on the Wall of History. Where it was in the Mask of Light as it gave us a clear views of a starry night sky and introduced us to other celestial bodies in the form of Toa stars? Were Toa stars meant to be a replacement for the Red Star concept and has suddenly popped up again in 2006? Why the absence? Peri believes, and I agree with her, that the Red Star could have been where the Great Beings were located. When the Maori controversy began, all references to Papu and Rangi were scrubbed from the story Bible, which may have included the Red Star itself. After some time had passed and the controversy blew over, Bob Thompson, who may well have been the person who added the Red Star to the Bible in the first place, felt it safe to reintroduce as the mechanism for the Toa in Nika's creation, and with no connection to the Great Beings. Take this theory with a grain of salt, however. There is no conclusive proof either way, and likely never will be. Mr. N also has his own article about Papu and Rangi that you can read if you're interested, and I suppose I can leave you with one final crackpot theory. Peri and I have long believed that the spirits of valor and wisdom that Akamai and Wairuha speak of in Motunui Online game may have been oblique references to Papu and Rangi. Take this one with an even bigger pinch of salt, though. Well, you do have a point there, Shadowed Emperor. Oh, that's not a sentence I'd ever thought I'd say. Bullrock. Alrighty, the Bullrock. That's where I got introduced to the Bionicle franchise, basically. My first ever one was a Korok. The Bullrock's awakening has a few different variations. In the unused early direction from Faber files, detailed in the Toa section above, the Toa continued their journey into Mangaya after defeating Makuta and attempted to reboot Motunui with a new consciousness using the Makoki Stone. But Makuta's virus was strong enough to prevent the robot from rising. Only the robot's left hand emerged from the ocean, creating the Three-Finger Island. But the process also released the Bullrock and began the process of cleaning the debris from the robot's exterior. In 2002, the "If you wake one, you wake them all" tagline was implied to be the reason for the Bullrock invasion. According to Mr. Faber in the post linked above, the Toa were responsible for waking up a single Bullrock, which started the chain reaction. I'd wager it is the same Bullrock shown waking up in Legend of Motunui in the entry chamber underneath Kaini Nui, which is also featured in the Project Bugs development video. It would seem the idea of Makuta being the one to awaken the Bullrock was a retcon. Speaking of Project Bugs, note that the Levak are described as the bug clan of air, which obviously contrasts with their power of acid in the final version, which was found to be better suited for their destructive purpose. This is also the only source to refer to Bullrock swarms as clans, which could possibly have included the Bullrock Var of each respective elemental affiliation. A Faber concept diagram shows the kinship between the Bullrock and the main characters, with the Toa corresponding to Bullrock, Toraga corresponding to Bullrock Var, and a Bullrock equivalent of the Matoran that never showed up in the story. I always thought Bullrock Var was the equivalent to the Matoran, but anyway. I asked Alistair if Borok were meant to have villages like Matorn, but unfortunately he did not remember. Lastly, one lone story source gives individual Borok the suffixes of their krona to denote their role in the swarm. Examples include Tanok Su, the swarm scout, and Korak Za, the swarm leader. And the island. There's always something about the concept of an island that draws many story writers and people who love adventure stories. Is it because that islands are, usually remote and a lost frontier in the ocean? One idea for 2002 was the emergence of the Three-Finger Island from the seabed, which would have been a big spoilerific hint about the existence of a giant robot, hence why it wasn't used. Further concept art from Faber shows a vortex between the islands above the robot's arm, where a hull breach was causing it to take in water, something that, like the Three Fingers, was present as early as the Boneheads of Voodoo Island phase. Oh yeah, we haven't actually mentioned the Boneheads of Voodoo Island in this one. That will be a story for another time, but basically it was like the very early part of Bionicle. It was also deemed too disturbing and too insensitive, apparently. This idea would later resurface in grand fashion with the reveal of the Kardanui waterfall in 2008, although the original Vortex idea appears to have had an influence on two story cards from Quest of the Masks, where Gali has to seal a whirlpool that threatens Garkoro. Also, as mentioned by Alistair, Martinui's knees and feet were said to be visible from above the sea in the story Bible, likely being islands unto themselves. I once asked Alistair if Martinui was ever meant to rise at the end of the Mask of Light movie. The film's dialogue suggests it repeatedly, as does the director's commentary, and then there's Makuta's mention of the earth shuddering.
The earth shudders, my brother.
And the free quake that Jala experiences, although that one could feasibly just be an aftershock from Onukoro's destruction. The shuddering is also mentioned by pre-release synopses. Alistair, however, gave a very clear and unambiguous no. Based on how far they planned these things in advance, Bob Thompson may very well have been intending to tell the Mask of Life saga back then as the third of his 7 books of Bionicle, which as a side note was only known to the members of the story team, according to Greg, and was abandoned after Thompson's departure, again according to Greg. Mr. N has an article about teleportation of Martinui that I highly recommend reading. As he explains, an island-wide teleportation network is mentioned in the extras for Bionicle the game, and there is some evidence in 2001 to suggest that it was more than just a game mechanic. Nothing is conclusive, however. The Suva at Kaini Nui is known as the Suva Kaita, so what are the Suva at the other Kaini called? The game extras has the answer. They are called Suva Mina, or Suva Mina. The Suva in the villages themselves, meanwhile, are simply named in accordance with everything else that in that wahi, like Onu Suva for Onokoro, according to Quest for the Masks. Originally, per the story booklet, the Pokoro Koli fields were held outside the village rather than inside as depicted in the online game and the legend of Martinui. There were also statues of Puhatu rather than Matorn heads throughout Pauahi. Additionally, Takoro was originally located in the Mangai volcano itself, and Likoro homes were disguised to look like hanging jungle weeds. And now we have some corrections and updates, okay. And finally, the afterword. If you've made it all the way through this now 20+ page document, thank you. I am very grateful for all the responses the original version received, and I hope these updates had something to surprise and delight you. I'll continue to update this document as long as there are still things to find. I'll also leave you with a few recommended links. Peri has a channel dedicated to the Martinui styled animations, so if you've got a hankering for more authentic but original Bionicle content, you should definitely check it out. Mr. N regularly updates his Russian Bionicle blog, Drop a Brick, here, and English translations of his articles are available here. Alistair released a book called The Multiverse of Max Tovey, which I recommend giving a read, especially if you've enjoyed the mythological parts of Bionicle as I did. Wow. Wasn't that a story and a half? Okay. I salute you, Shadow Emperor. You did a hell of a job putting this 23-page document together that reads almost like a novel. So as you see, there's a lot of external links and other stuff referenced here. So if you want to check that out, by all means do so. And I've more or less given them shoutouts as I've read them and all that. I'll also try to include as much linked visual content as possible, and visual aids as well. Anyway, hope you all have a lovely Bionicle day, or a lovely day in general, and feel free to explore all of this. The legend of the creation of the legend of the Bionicle.